In the Shadow of Secrets, Part 9, The Final Reckoning. The night was thick with tension as John stood in front of the door to his apartment. He had received Bashar's message hours ago. "Meet me tonight. We need to talk." And every second that passed since then had only intensified the sense of dread building in his chest. He wasn't sure what he expected from this meeting, but he knew one thing for sure. It would be the moment where everything he thought he understood about his life in Damascus would be turned on its head. He reached for the door handle, his hand steady despite the nervous flutter in his stomach. As he stepped into the dimly lit hallway, the silence seemed deafening. The apartment felt colder than usual, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something. Bashar was already there, standing by the window, looking out over the chaotic cityscape. The glow of the city lights cast shadows across his face, making him appear even more distant, more enigmatic than ever. "You came," Bashar said, his voice quiet but filled with an intensity that sent a shiver down John's spine. "I don't have much choice, do I?" John replied, his voice laced with the exhaustion of someone who had been forced to make too many decisions in too short a time. He closed the door behind him, his eyes never leaving Bashar. "I need to know everything. No more lies, no more half-truths. I'm done with that." Bashar turned to face him fully, his expression unreadable. "You're not going to like what I have to say, John, but it's the truth." John's heart pounded in his chest. "Then let's hear it." Bashar nodded slowly and took a deep breath. "The people behind the operation, Deadlock, they've been manipulating events for years, but it's bigger than just Syria. Much bigger. This goes beyond borders, beyond governments. There are corporate interests, intelligence agencies, and military groups all pulling strings to destabilize the region. They want to control the flow of information, the movement of people, the resources, everything." John's stomach churned as he listened, the weight of Bashar's words settling heavily in the air between them. "And you're part of that? You're telling me that you've been working for these people, helping them manipulate the world, and now you want me to help you bring it all down?" Bashar's eyes hardened. "I never wanted to be a part of it. I thought I could change things from the inside. But you don't understand, John. Once you're in, once you know too much, you become a part of the machine. I tried to fight it, tried to gather the right evidence, but they always knew where I was. They always knew what I was planning." John shook his head, the anger and confusion boiling up inside him. "So, what now? What do you want from me? After everything, after all the lies, after you dragged me into this, what do you want from me?" Bashar took a step closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. "I need your help to expose them, John, to stop them before it's too late. If we don't act now, they'll succeed in their plan. They'll control everything, and there will be no turning back." John felt a wave of disbelief wash over him. "And you think I can just walk away from this? From everything I've been through? From Anna and all the other people who are just as caught up in this mess as I am?" Bashar's gaze softened, a flicker of regret passing over his features. "I never wanted this for you. You're not just a pawn, John. You've got a chance to make a difference, but you have to decide now. Do you want to fight for something real, or do you want to keep living in the lie they've created for us?" John looked at Bashar, his mind a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. The man standing before him wasn't the person he had come to know. He wasn't the friend he had trusted, the ally he had worked beside. This was someone who had been swept up in something far beyond his control, a part of a machine that was too big and too dangerous to comprehend. But still, there was something in Bashar's eyes that made John pause, a flicker of the man he had once believed in. Could he trust him again? Was there any truth left to cling to? "I need proof, Bashar," John said finally, his voice steady but firm. "I need real proof. Not just words. I need evidence that I can use to bring them down. Because I won't walk into this blind. Not again." Bashar nodded, his expression serious. "I can get you the files. I've been collecting them for months. They're buried deep, but I know where to look. We can expose the people behind it all, the ones pulling the strings. But we have to move quickly. Time's running out." John took a deep breath, his resolve solidifying. "All right, let's do it. But remember this, Bashar. If you're lying to me again, if I find out that you've been using me this whole time, there's no coming back from that." "I swear to you, John," Bashar said, his voice earnest. "I'm not lying. I'm not playing games anymore. This is the real deal, and together we can stop it. As they worked through the night, the atmosphere in the apartment grew more intense. John felt the weight of their task pressing down on him with each passing hour. He had seen the danger, felt the fear, and yet he couldn't shake the sense of responsibility that had taken root within him. If what Bashar was saying was true, if they could expose the operation and stop it before it spread any further, he had to try. But even as they gathered their evidence, as they made plans to infiltrate the web of corruption and deceit that had ensnared them both, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that there were eyes on them lurking just out of sight. The next morning, as John walked through the bustling streets of Damascus, he couldn't help but feel like a man on the edge of a precipice. Every step he took seemed to bring him closer to the unknown, to a fate that was no longer in his control. He knew that the road ahead would be perilous, and that every choice he made from here on out would lead him deeper into the heart of a conspiracy that had far-reaching consequences. As he arrived at the meeting point, an abandoned building on the outskirts of the city, he spotted Bashar waiting for him, the bag of evidence slung over his shoulder. But something felt wrong. The air was thick with tension, the silence oppressive, and as John stepped closer, he saw it, a figure lurking in the shadows, watching them. A cold realization swept over him. They weren't alone. End of Part 9. In the Shadow of Secrets. Part 10. Betrayal in the Shadows. John's heart raced as he stepped closer to the abandoned building, the warning bells in his mind ringing louder with each step. There was something off about the scene, too quiet, too still. It wasn't just the eerie silence of the place, it was the sense of eyes watching them, tracking their every move. Bashar stood by the entrance, his posture tense, eyes darting around nervously. He had been waiting for John, but there was a different energy about him now. Gone was the calm assurance of the man John had once known. In his place was someone on edge, someone who feared the very thing they had been trying to confront. "Something's wrong," John said, his voice low but steady, as he stepped up beside Bashar. "I know," Bashar muttered, his hand gripping the strap of his bag more tightly. "I didn't expect them to be this close, but we don't have a choice. We need to get the files out of here before they realize what we've got." John glanced around, scanning the perimeter for any signs of movement. The building was old, the windows cracked and dirty, the door creaking in protest as it swung open. But something in the shadows felt wrong. Too many dark corners, too many places where someone could hide. They entered the building cautiously, every step echoing through the emptiness. Inside, it was worse than John had imagined. Dust and debris everywhere, the remnants of a once functioning structure now abandoned and left to decay. It felt like the kind of place where secrets were buried, where anything could happen. Bashar led the way, moving swiftly toward a back room where he had hidden the files. "They won't be able to trace us if we're careful," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. John knew that Bashar, for all his bravado, was just as nervous as he was. The stakes were higher than ever. But as they reached the room, John stopped dead in his tracks. In the corner, standing in the shadows, was a figure. "Anna," John breathed, his chest tightening at the sight of her. Anna stepped forward, her eyes locked on John with a mixture of something unreadable, regret, determination, maybe even fear, but it was too late for any of that. The damage had already been done. "I had a feeling you'd be here," Anna said, her voice steady, though there was a crack in it, as if she were struggling to maintain control. John turned to Bashar, confusion clouding his thoughts. "You knew she was here? You didn't tell me?" Bashar's expression was one of frustration, but he didn't reply. Instead, his eyes flicked to Anna and back to John, the tension between them palpable. "You don't have to do this, Anna," John said, his voice softer now. "You don't have to be part of this. Whatever they've promised you, it's not worth it. We can still stop this." Anna's lips twisted into a tight smile. "It's not that simple, John. You've already crossed the line. Once you're this deep in, there's no turning back. You think they're playing a game? You think you can stop it with a few files and some quick decisions? You're just another pawn in their system. The moment you picked up that information, you became part of the operation." John shook his head, disbelief taking hold. "You're lying. You don't really believe that." "I'm not lying, John. I'm trying to save you, Anna replied, her voice suddenly filled with a bitter edge. "This whole thing, the mission, the lies, it's all bigger than you can imagine. If you think you can pull the plug on this and walk away with no consequences, you're wrong." Bashar stepped between them, his voice low and warning. "Enough, Anna. We don't have time for this. John's made his choice." Anna looked at him sharply. "You think you've got control of this situation? You're a fool, Bashar. You're playing a game you don't understand, and you're about to lose." John's mind raced. There were too many variables, too many moving parts. He had thought he understood the situation, had thought he could control it, or at least get out of it. But Anna's words were beginning to sink in, each one cutting deeper into his belief that there was a way out. Bashar grabbed John's arm and pulled him away from Anna, his eyes flicking to the door. "We need to go, now," he whispered urgently. But before they could make another move, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. John froze, his breath catching in his throat. "Stay right where you are," a voice ordered, low and menacing. Anna's eyes went wide with panic, and she turned toward the doorway. "You shouldn't have come, Bashar. None of you should have." John's heart raced as the footsteps grew louder. "Who is it?" he whispered, his voice tight with anxiety. But Bashar didn't answer. Instead, he pushed John toward the back door, his hand gripping his shoulder with a sense of urgency that left no room for questioning. "Get out of here now," Bashar ordered. Before John could process what was happening, Bashar had shoved him toward the exit. "Go, I'll hold them off." "No," John protested, grabbing Bashar's arm. "We go together." But Bashar's expression was cold, determined. "This is the only way." The door slammed open just as Bashar turned to face Anna, his body blocking the exit. "Go, John, now!" John hesitated for a split second, the weight of the decision pressing on him. But he knew there was no time to argue. The sound of boots echoed closer, and he ran. The back alley was dark and narrow, the buildings towering above him. As he sprinted through the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't stop. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. As he turned the corner, he glanced back. The building loomed behind him, a cold monument to the decisions that had brought him here. The sound of gunshots rang out in the distance, and John's stomach churned with dread. Bashar was still back there. He had sacrificed himself for their plan. For John. But would it be enough? John didn't know. He kept running. End of Part X. In the Shadow of Secrets. Part 10-1, The Price of Truth. The streets of Damascus felt colder than ever as John stumbled through the alleys, his mind reeling from what had just happened. Bashar's sacrifice, the sound of gunshots echoing in his ears, haunted him. Every part of him screamed to go back, to fight for his friend. But there had been no time. The soldiers were closing in, and he had to keep running. His breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning with the effort of putting as much distance between himself and the building, where everything had fallen apart. The streets were empty, but he knew they wouldn't stay that way for long. The authorities would be looking for him, for anyone who might have witnessed what had happened. He turned a corner, his heart still pounding in his chest, and came face to face with the last person he ever expected to see in Damascus. "Elizabeth?" he gasped, disbelief flooding him. He blinked, sure that he was seeing things. But no, it was her. The same Elizabeth from London, the one he had last seen at her grandmother's funeral. She looked just as surprised to see him, but there was something different in her eyes. Something desperate, as if she too had been running from something. "John," she said, her voice tight with concern. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," John replied, his voice strained. I don't know what's going on. Everything's falling apart. Bashar, he's gone. I don't know how long I have before they come for me." Elizabeth's expression shifted, her eyes darkening. She glanced over her shoulder, as if checking for anyone who might be following her. "It's worse than you think," she said, her voice low. "Much worse." John frowned. "What do you mean? What's going on? I thought you were in London." "I was," she interrupted, taking a step closer. "But I had to come here. Things in London are spiraling out of control. Greta's arrest, that was just the beginning. There's a network of people behind all of this, John, and I think it leads back to Deadlock, the operation you've been caught up in." John's mind whirled with the implications. What does this have to do with Bashar? With Anna? Elizabeth hesitated before answering. Anna? She's not just some intelligence officer, John. She's part of a larger operation, a covert operation designed to control global power dynamics. And I think Bashar was more involved than he ever let on. He was working as a double agent, feeding information to both sides. John took a step back, his thoughts swirling. Bashar was working for Deadlock the whole time? Not just Deadlock, Elizabeth replied, her voice shaking with frustration. Bashar was playing a dangerous game. He thought he could use Deadlock against itself, but he underestimated how deep it went. John shook his head, trying to process it all. I don't understand. Why would Bashar do that? Why would he put us all at risk? Elizabeth's gaze softened, as if she too was struggling to make sense of the situation. Because he thought there was a way out. He thought he could expose them, stop them before it was too late. But now, I'm afraid that if we don't act fast, the consequences will be irreversible. John's heart clenched. And you think that's still possible, after everything that's happened? Elizabeth nodded. There's always a way, John, but it's going to be dangerous. We need to get to the files that Bashar hid. We need to find the evidence before they do. John's mind raced. He had thought that the truth was within his reach. But now he realized that it was slipping further away with every moment. The stakes were higher than he ever could have imagined. It wasn't just about Bashar anymore. It wasn't even just about Deadlock. It was about something bigger, something much darker. As they stood there in the cold Damascus street, Elizabeth's words hung heavily in the air. The operation they had been uncovering wasn't just a local conspiracy. It stretched across borders, across nations, and it involved more players than they could possibly understand. Powers that had been pulling the strings for years, manipulating governments, intelligence agencies, and private corporations alike. The truth was a dangerous thing to uncover, and now that John had seen it, there was no going back. Hours later, after a hurried escape from Damascus to a hidden safe house, John and Elizabeth sat in silence, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. John had told Elizabeth everything about Bashar's secret, his connection to Deadlock, and his final, tragic attempt to expose the truth. But even as they spoke, John felt that gnawing sensation that they were still missing something important, a piece of the puzzle that hadn't quite clicked into place. Elizabeth broke the silence. John, there's something else you need to know, something I've been trying to figure out. John looked up at her, his expression weary. What is it? I've been digging into the operation you've been caught in, the one you've been chasing for months now. Deadlock, yes, but also something much darker, she began, her voice steady, but with an edge of urgency. The people behind it aren't just after power. They're after something else, something far more valuable. John's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Elizabeth leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I think Deadlock is just a front, a smokescreen. What they're really after is control over information. Global, unchecked control. They've been manipulating the way governments respond to crises, orchestrating wars, and even controlling the flow of media. But there's more, John. They're using a series of covert operations to infiltrate and destabilize entire regions, including Europe, the Middle East, even Asia. John's stomach churned as he listened. Everything he had thought he understood about the conspiracy seemed to shift before his eyes. This wasn't just a battle for power anymore. This was a war for control over the very fabric of society. And you think they are behind all of this? The arrests, the lies, the manipulation? John asked, his voice low. Elizabeth nodded grimly. Yes, but there's something else. The files that Bashar hid, they're crucial. But the moment we have them, it's going to trigger a chain of events we can't predict. We have to be ready. John leaned back against the wall, his mind racing with the implications. He had walked into this situation thinking he could control the narrative, thinking he could expose the truth. But now he realized just how much bigger the story had become. This wasn't just about Bashar or Deadlock. This was a war for the world's future, and it was a war that had already begun. End of Part 1. In the Shadow of Secrets. Part 12. A Web of Deceit. The safe house was a small, nondescript building on the outskirts of the city, tucked away in a neighborhood where the streets were narrow and the people kept to themselves. Inside, the air felt heavy with tension, the silence between John and Elizabeth almost suffocating. They sat on opposite sides of the room, both absorbed in their thoughts, the weight of everything they just learned pressing down on them. John couldn't shake the image of Bashar, the sacrifice his friend had made, the gunshots, the final words that still echoed in his mind. He had thought Bashar was just a pawn in a much bigger game, but now he understood. Bashar had been trying to change the game, and he had failed. But that failure didn't make John's mission any less urgent. If anything, it made it more so. The files Bashar had hidden, whatever information they contained, were the key to stopping Deadlock and everything it represented. He glanced at Elizabeth, who was flipping through pages of notes she had gathered, her face drawn and pale. She looked as though she hadn't slept in days, and John could relate. They both felt the same pressure, the weight of knowing that they were about to walk into something much darker than either of them had expected. "John," Elizabeth finally said, breaking the silence, "we need to move quickly. I've managed to trace part of the operation. Deadlock isn't just a network of spies and operatives. They've infiltrated governments, corporations, even private organizations. But there's more." John's brow furrowed. "What do you mean more?" Elizabeth stood, pacing across the room. "I've been piecing things together from the files we've seen, from the intelligence I've gathered. It's not just about power, it's about control of the global narrative. Deadlock has been manipulating world events for years. Wars, financial crises, refugee crises, all of it was orchestrated to create chaos and destabilize regions. But now, they're targeting something else." John stood up, his hands clenched into fists. "What are they targeting?" Elizabeth turned to face him, her eyes dark with the weight of the truth. "They're targeting the flow of information itself. If they can control the data, if they can control the stories people believe, they can control the future. And that's what we're up against. If we don't stop them now, they'll succeed." The room felt colder now, the air thick with the realization that they were no longer just chasing shadows. They were up against something far more insidious. John's mind raced. He thought of the people they'd already lost: Bashar, Greta, the countless others caught in the web of lies and betrayal. He thought of Anna, who was still out there somewhere, working for Deadlock, and the dangerous game she had been playing. But it wasn't just about them anymore. This was bigger than personal allegiances. This was about the fate of entire countries, entire populations. He turned to Elizabeth. "So what's the plan? How do we stop them?" Elizabeth hesitated, looking down at the papers in front of her. "We need to find the core of the operation, the head of the snake. It's not just about uncovering the files anymore. It's about dismantling the whole system. The files are just the tip of the iceberg." "And where do we start?" John asked, his voice steady, though his pulse was racing. "You said you've traced part of the operation. Where does it lead?" Elizabeth met his gaze, her expression resolute. "I've traced it to Warsaw." John's heart skipped a beat. Warsaw. He had heard rumors of connections there, whispers of Deadlock's far-reaching influence in Europe, but he hadn't expected to be heading there so soon. "Warsaw?" John repeated. "Why there?" Elizabeth sat back down, her hands trembling slightly as she flipped through more papers. "There's a high-level meeting taking place there. Members of Deadlock and their affiliates. The people who hold the real power, the ones who've been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. If we can get to them, if we can expose them." Her voice trailed off, as if she wasn't sure what would happen next. There was no clear path forward, no guaranteed way to take down such a powerful organization. But there was no other choice. They had to try. John nodded slowly. "All right, we'll go to Warsaw." Elizabeth looked at him, her gaze softening for just a moment before hardening again. "There's one thing you need to understand, John. Going to Warsaw isn't just about getting the files or exposing the truth. If we go there, we're going to be targets. Deadlock knows we're onto them. They know we're coming." John's stomach churned. He could feel the gravity of what she was saying, the very real danger they were walking into. But there was no turning back now. They had already made too many sacrifices. And if they didn't do this, no one else would. He squared his shoulders. "Then we'll be ready." A few days later, John and Elizabeth found themselves in the heart of Warsaw, the city's darkened streets stretching out before them like a labyrinth. The mission had gone into high gear. They had no time to waste, no room for mistakes. They had to find the truth before Deadlock silenced them. Or worse. They moved swiftly, slipping through alleyways, using every tactic they had learned to avoid detection. But even as they moved in the shadows, John couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every turn felt like a trap. Every street, a potential ambush. Finally, after hours of maneuvering, they reached the building. It was a nondescript hotel in a quiet district of the city, one that didn't stand out among the other buildings. But John knew it wasn't just a hotel. It was Deadlock's base of operations in Warsaw, and inside, the heart of the conspiracy pulsed. John and Elizabeth entered the building cautiously, their senses on high alert. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. But as they approached the elevator, a sudden sound made John freeze, a soft click. Then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Someone was following them. "Move," Elizabeth whispered, her hand on John's arm. She pulled him toward the nearest stairwell. But before they could escape, a voice called out from the shadows. "You're too late!" John spun around, his pulse quickening. Standing in the hallway, a figure stepped into the dim light. It was Anna. End of Part 12. In the Shadow of Secrets, Part 13. Betrayal in the Shadows. The air in the dimly lit hallway felt thick with tension as Anna stepped forward, her eyes fixed on John and Elizabeth. She was dressed in a tailored black suit, her demeanor calm, almost too calm given the situation. John's heart pounded in his chest. He had thought, hoped that Anna had been on their side. But now, as she stood before them, it was clear. They were standing at the edge of a precipice, and the ground beneath them was crumbling. "You're too late," Anna repeated, her voice eerily calm, devoid of the warmth he had once believed in. "I warned you, John. There are forces at play here that you don't understand." Elizabeth's hand went instinctively to her jacket, where she had hidden a small gun for protection. But Anna was faster. In the blink of an eye, she drew her own weapon, pointing it at them with practiced ease. "Don't try anything," Anna warned, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not here to kill you. At least, not yet. But you need to listen." John's mind was reeling. Anna had been a constant in his life since arriving in Damascus. He had trusted her, confided in her, and even worked with her to uncover Deadlock. The thought that she might have been playing them from the start felt like a punch to the gut. He took a cautious step forward, trying to steady his breathing. "What do you want, Anna?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "You know what's at stake. We're trying to stop Deadlock. You're part of this. You know the stakes as much as we do. Why are you helping them?" Anna's lips curled into a small, almost sympathetic smile, but her eyes were cold, unrecognizable. "I'm not helping them, John," she said, her voice barely a whisper now. "I'm helping you. Or rather, I'm helping us all." John blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about? Us? Who is us?" "Exactly." Anna lowered her gun slightly but kept it in her hand. "You don't know everything, do you? I guess I never truly explained. Deadlock isn't just a rogue operation. It's part of something far larger, a plan decades in the making." Elizabeth stepped forward, her voice sharp. "What are you saying? This isn't just a group of corrupt intelligence officers or a criminal network. You're talking about an agenda." Anna's gaze flickered with a mix of regret and resolve. "Yes, an agenda. Deadlock is the tip of the iceberg, John. It was never just about power. It was about controlling information. But it's not only about Deadlock anymore. It's about creating a new world order. A world where the people in power control everything. Every government, every corporation, every narrative." John's mind reeled. "A new world order? You're saying this has been planned all along?" "Yes," Anna replied, "for decades. But it's much bigger than Deadlock, or even Deadlock's leaders. The people behind all of this are global, pulling strings across borders and nations. Governments, organizations, corporations, they all have a stake in this, whether they realize it or not." Elizabeth's face twisted in disbelief. "But why help them? Why be part of it?" Anna's gaze hardened. "Because I believe in the cause. I've seen the world as it is. I've seen the chaos, the corruption, and the way the system is broken. The people who think they're in control, they're not. They're just pawns. Deadlock is the future, and I'm not the only one who thinks so." John took a step back, his mind racing. "So, everything we've done, everything we've uncovered, it was all just part of the plan? We were just pawns in your game. Anna's face darkened. No, John. You weren't pawns. You're the key. You've always been the key. The files Bashar hid, they contain the final pieces. If we can get them, if we can unlock their full potential, the new order can begin. But the files have to be in the right hands. It's the only way to stop the world from falling into total chaos. The weight of her words hit John like a freight train. This wasn't just a battle between good and evil anymore. It was a war for control of the future. The stakes had escalated far beyond his understanding. And Anna, the woman he had trusted, was not only part of this new world order, but she was also urging him to join it. "Why come to us now?" Elizabeth asked, her voice trembling with fury. "Why tell us all of this?" Anna's eyes softened, a flicker of something like regret passing across her features. "Because you're running out of time? I can help you. I can give you the tools you need to stop deadlock, but you have to make a choice." John felt his mind spiral as the weight of the decision before him crashed over him. This wasn't just about fighting deadlock anymore. It was about deciding what kind of world he wanted to live in, and whether he was willing to betray everything he believed in to make that world a reality. Anna didn't hesitate. "Because I'm the only one who can help you, John. I'm the one who knows how to take them down. I'm the one who knows where the files are hidden. If you don't trust me, then you'll never find them in time. Deadlock will have won, and there's no going back." John and Elizabeth exchanged a look. Every instinct screamed that they couldn't trust Anna. But deep down, John knew that they were out of options. He wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. But he was beginning to realize that the line between right and wrong had blurred beyond recognition. Finally, John spoke. "What's the plan?" Anna's gaze flickered with a hint of something darker. "Follow me, and don't ask questions until we're there. We're running out of time." They moved quickly, slipping through the quiet streets of Warsaw under the cover of darkness. Anna led them to a nondescript building, its walls covered with graffiti and faded posters. Inside, they were greeted by a small group of operatives, all sharp-eyed and tense. They looked at John and Elizabeth with suspicion, but made no move to stop them. Anna's word was enough. "Now we begin," Anna said quietly, her voice steady. John felt a chill run down his spine. He had walked into this with a sense of purpose, of righteousness. But now, as they moved deeper into the heart of the conspiracy, he wasn't so sure anymore. The world he had once known was slipping through his fingers, and in its place was a nightmare of manipulation, control, and deceit. As they entered a secure room filled with computers and encrypted files, Anna gestured to one of the monitors. "There, the files are inside." John approached the screen cautiously. The code on the monitor was complex, almost impenetrable. He wasn't sure what he was looking at, but Anna's next words sent a chill through his bones. "These are the final pieces of the puzzle, John. With this, we can rewrite history. You have a choice now. You can help me, or you can walk away. But if you choose the latter, you'll be a target. Deadlock will stop at nothing to ensure that these files never see the light of day." John stared at the screen, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Everything he had fought for, everything he had believed in, had led him here. But now, the future was uncertain. The truth was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. And the world, it seemed, would never be the same again. End of part 13.